Welcome to this special presentation from FedGov Today, Intelligent Government, Smart Strategies to Accelerate AI Innovation, presented by ServiceNow. I'm the host of FedGov Today, Francis Rose. The Federal Chief Information Officers Council reports more than 1,700 use cases for artificial intelligence as of its last use case inventory at the end of 2024. As that number grows, agencies say they're facing data, automation, and governance issues as they scale. Over the next hour, you'll learn how to manage AI effectively for your organization from federal leaders who take control of their data, use automation, and optimize mission performance with strategic AI investments. We begin with Mike Hurt, Group Vice President for U.S. Public Sector at ServiceNow. Mike, welcome. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you, Francis.
How do you see that intersection of AI, data, and workflow management for mission delivery?
Yeah, good question. I really see it from a mission acceleration standpoint. You know, you've got AI models out there that really help you do predictive outcomes, figure out data patterns, and then you have, I should say, data or AI is only as good as the data that you provided, right? And so when you have good data with good AI models, you can actually use workflow to operationalize and get real outcomes out of, the predictive outcomes that you actually achieved. And so the three are inextricably linked and really important when you're talking about getting the full value out of your AI assets.
Agencies have been on a data journey for, I believe, 10 years or so now, really codified in the first Trump administration under the federal data strategy. Does the work that they're doing in that direction, though, necessarily make the data ready for AI, or are they two separate beings?
No, I mean, really to get your data ready, you really kind of have to be able to take control of your entire estate. And being able to do that really comes down to making sure that it's the data that you're actually able to get access to, making sure you have the right security controls on that data, making sure that it's standardized. Right now, there is data in federal agencies that are in lots and lots of different applications. I was talking to a customer the other day and they said they had 3,000 different applications in their environment. And as you can imagine, that creates tons of data silos, essentially, because each one of those applications has its own data store. Mm-hmm. And so in order to make that data ready or AI ready, you really need to be able to bring all that data to one place without having to create these large data lakes. That's a very complex process. And then also be able to make sure that the people that should have access to that data are the ones that have access to it, having the right security controls on top of it, and make sure that it has the right metadata associated with it, the tagging associated with it, so you can get the full value of AI. Again, AI is only as good as the data that you feed it.
So it strikes me, if you've got 3,000 different applications that have data in them and you're trying to bring those into one application or one repository at least, you probably have a lot of duplicative data in there, a lot of stuff that's at multiple different places. What's the analytics posture of an agency that's successful that you've seen in being able to navigate all of that?
Yeah, I think, again, AI really helps you ferret a lot of that stuff out. But if you can bring all that data in without having to, do a ton of work around actually tagging everything, but just be able, we have a technology at ServiceNow called Data Fabric, and it allows you to reach into all those different applications, bring those in from a zero copy perspective, and really be able to stitch all that together and make it really seamless and easy for your AI to really manipulate it and get real value out of it.
Easy seems to me, just as an outsider, to be the most desirable word of all the ones that you've used, because I keep hearing from agency people, AI is making my systems more efficient and faster, but it's also making them more complex.
It does. I mean, when you have that many applications and that, what I see is customers sort of sometimes doing AI for the sake of doing AI. And I really, that's probably not the right approach, because it does create additional complexity, and AI shouldn't, while it does create additional complexity, it really shouldn't stifle innovation, right? With innovation. And so one of the things that we see with customers that are being successful in using AI in their environment is that they have a really good governance structure associated with how they manage their data, how they have access to the data. also the LLM models that they're using. Obviously, we've got a lot of technology companies in the industry who have great AI technologies, but how are you centrally kind of managing that from a governance perspective to get the full value out of it and make sure that, again, people have access to the data they need, that the AI models have access to what they need access to as well. And so really the platform approach I see working really well with customers because it gives them the opportunity to kind of manage it centrally as opposed to having these point solutions that each AI product essentially, manages it themselves. So at ServiceNow, we like to think of ourselves as sort of the wrapper around the AI environment inside of a customer.
You've referred to the importance of governance a couple of times in this conversation already. Is that really the key to an agency getting the most effectiveness, the best return on investment on what they spend on AI?
I think it's really important from the standpoint. I've seen a lot of customers really benefit from creating like an AI council. And, what you want to do is make sure that you are learning from others inside of the agency, that, you have the right standards that you're doing. You want to make sure you're evaluating the AI models for bias potentially. You want to make sure that there are standards across those LLM models. And so that governance is a core piece. But I think there are, obviously other steps. We talked about your data as well being, in the right place to be really successful at it.
What do you tell agencies that ask you, I'm not sure I'm leveraging this technology in the most effective way and in the most cost-effective way? What's usually the advice that you give someone?
Yeah, that's a good point. I was reading an article the other day, and it said only 20% of the CIOs that actually have implemented AI in their environments are seeing the value from it. And I think that really comes from people doing just AI for, throwing AI at a specific problem. What I see customers being successful with, and what we recommend is, really picking some of the highest value processes that in your environment are really struggling. We have a technology called process mining that you can throw out at a particular process, and it will dig and find out all the issues associated with your process. And then that actually becomes a really good target for actually using AI to automate that and create efficiencies. And what I would suggest is that you do that across multiple processes, stack rank the most important processes that you want to automate and start from there. So you get the full value out of it. If you're just kind of going off doing it for the sake of doing it, you're probably going to be in that 20% that doesn't get the real value out of AI.
Mike, it's great to have you on the program. Thanks very much for joining me. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
You can read more about leveraging AI for measurable efficiency gains at fedgovtoday.com. Up next, getting control of your data. Intelligent government continues in a moment. Don't go away.
Behold, AI. They say it will change our world. How about we start by changing work? On the ServiceNow platform, AI transforms your business with elevated experiences so employees work smarter, developers work faster, and customers are happier. Because everything works better when people work better. Let's put AI to work for people. The world works with ServiceNow.
Welcome back. You learned in the first part of this program how the relationship between AI, data, and workflows shapes mission delivery. The journey begins and ends with data. To tell you more, Taka Ariga, former Chief Data Officer and Chief AI Officer at the Office of Personnel Management, and Patrick McGarry, Federal Chief Data Officer at ServiceNow. Gentlemen, welcome. Thanks for joining me. Taka, OPM not the only place, of course, that you've been involved with data inside the federal government, either in organizations that you've been in or that you've observed from the outside. What have you seen be the primary obstacles to getting data ready for AI applications?
Yeah, Francis, first of all, thank you for having me on the show. I guess the number one issue that I've seen is conflating IT with AI, because there's so much, technology overlap for sure, but when it comes to AI, the way that we treat data is differently. It's no longer rows and columns. A lot of time it's really more vectorized store. And we shouldn't sort of treat software developer the same way that we treat AI engineer, data engineer, or even data scientist. There's so much user experience element to this, so it's more than just infrastructure architectural consideration. And the last point I'll just make is that AI has its distinctive challenges. It's very difficult to say we're now going to subdivide IT organization into a bunch of part-timers to drive that solution development.
What have you seen help people get over the idea that AI and IT are kind of the same thing or should be treated in the same way?
Yeah, I go back to my experience at GAO. We had an innovation lab, and our focus was really specifically to develop these AI use cases because there were a lot of new challenges that we needed to address. How do we scale these things? How do we bring unstructured data together in a way that is sort of ingestible? How do we develop the context to these queries? And how do we develop the user experience that are necessary to develop the trust that the auditors needs to have? And those are not the kind of thing that you can typically go from left to right in a software lifecycle development. And so, we very much focus on developing those prototype, and then we partner with the IT organization to think through the scalability and productionalization concerns.
Patrick, welcome. How does what you've seen as you've worked with agencies all across government sync with what Taka just described?
Well, I think he's right on, but I would take it a step further in terms of the sort of AI IT divide. I think the biggest thing that we're looking at right now is almost cultural, right? I like to describe it as a socio-technical problem, right? You got to bring the people and the technology into this particular solution. And when you look at the biggest problem, it's really data fragmentation, right? Because you've got all these people that have got their stovepipes and they want to keep their data for themselves and they don't talk to each other and they don't work together. And so the data has the same sorts of problems where it's just not interoperable. So I think everybody in government and everywhere really knows that, hey, we got a lot of data, and the problem is they can't tie that data to specific mission problems or data stewards or even to each other, other data sets. And so I think the first problem we're really going to have to solve is a cultural problem of how do we really work together, and then the data can do the same thing.
So the cultural issue, obviously, then that's not a process or technology problem, that's a people problem.
That is absolutely a people problem.
What have you seen as a way is that building a strategy and conveying that strategy to the people that are involved? Is that tactical operations or tactical things that people do? What's the root of that?
Yeah, I've seen a number of different approaches to how people solve this, but really I think the most effective ways is really when you start cutting across the organization, right? You bring all of the stakeholders together in some way that doesn't feel stilted, right? You got to get the legal folks and the IT folks and the data folks and the reporting folks working together in some way. And I think that has to be unique to your organization because otherwise it's going to feel like it's something that was bolted onto the side of the org.
You were nodding enthusiastically as he was talking about all the partners that will be involved in that conversation. Did he get them all, or are there others that you think should be at the table too?
Absolutely. I mean, at OPM, we pilot this process called Agile governance. It's bringing all the different stakeholders, legal, privacy, human capital, procurement, to the table. But that specifically, we structure that governance to move at the speed of innovation so that we're not having technology moving ahead while all these potentially bureaucratic items are playing catch up. And so I think that was an important realization for us that innovation can actually be accelerated when you have agile governance in place.
How did you build that agility into the governance structure? Because when I think of those two things, one's over here and one's over here.
We took euphemistically, a two-pizza rule. So we limited the participation to no more than 10 people. But it was a cross-sectional set of folks from HR, privacy, legal, data, technology shop for sure. We met actually very frequently on a biweekly basis. And we went through all of the issues. Because the traditional governance structure, maybe you meet once a quarter, right, for an hour across agency, and you make it that 5 minute on the agenda. And there's no way we can address the plethora of issue that we need to make these timely decisions on. So we met every week, every other week, and we address all of not only the use case issues, but all of the risk inherent to those use case issues. And we make these incremental decisions along the way.
Blessed it's humans talking to each other about how things are working and whether they should be changed, Patrick, is what it sounds like.
Yeah.
What a concept.
You're right. Yeah. And I mean, if the humans aren't talking, there's no amount of machines talking that's going to solve the problem.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. Right. So we talked at the beginning of this, I plugged that we would discuss on this program the concept of getting control of one's data. What's the definition of that in 2025 when AI applications are proliferating across government and the data, you said a few moments ago, it's plenty of data. Everybody's got data. What does data control look like now?
I think the biggest thing is not being too focused on the data, right? I think really, the data is a tool like anything else. And ultimately, you've got to understand what are the problems we're trying to solve, right? So you've got to take the data that you have, contextualize it, right? So you bring together data from different parts of the organization, but make sure that you're always driving towards that mission outcome, right? And I think that's going to be the real key in terms of control your data, because a lot of the rest of it is going to fall out as a matter of course when you're trying to answer real problems. The other part of it is really about governance. Too often, governance is hosted in some kind of PDF on a SharePoint, site somewhere, and no one ever looks at it, right? So making sure that your governance is tied with the data and moves with it. That way, your organization can sort of move at that mission speed without having to worry about governance falling down along the way.
Now, when you say don't focus on the data so much, that sounds counterintuitive to me. Is that because people kind of get decision paralysis by thinking so much about the data and how it has to be shaped and how it has to be curated and how perfect it has to be, that they never actually get around to doing the things with it that will help them on mission delivery?
Yeah, absolutely. I call that analysis paralysis, and I'm not the first one to use that term, right? So it's, if you get too wrapped around the axle on your data, you're going to forget what questions you're answering.
I want to go back to the analytic or the governance piece that you talked about a moment ago because of something Patrick said. He talked about governance being in a PDF hung someplace where nobody ever looks at it, and that strikes me that every 2-week cadence that you established at OPM prevented that exact thing, that it didn't have a chance to get stuck at the back of some hard drive somewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. From a policy perspective, we knew AI is in such a sort of moving state. The policies themselves were meant to be evolving because we didn't have all of the answers. But we also coupled policy with continuous monitoring just to be able to understand how our user actually engaging with whether it's permissible AI solution or worst case scenario, impermissible AI solution. So, it's really setting up that structure to make sure not only the policy, the governance, the risk management can all evolve as circumstances change.
So you had a little bit of an advantage on this next question because of your GAO experience, but when you were at OPM, where did you go both inside government and outside government to see how they were doing it, to see how that might apply to how you wanted to do it at OPM?
Yeah, when I was at GAO, we learned the lesson early on that we shouldn't treat data in the context of buckets. We should be treating data in the context of fabrics, because these threads are interconnected. And fundamentally, if folks think that the way that AI works is simply by shoving data into these AI models and they will magically function, I think they are in for a rude awakening. There are a lot of contextual training. There are a lot of what we call retrieval augmented generation techniques that needs to apply, especially for an agency like GAO, like OPM, where our AI vision doesn't necessarily rest with ChatGPT, Perplexity, or Claude. It rests with a lot of these bespoke solutions that we end up developing in-house because we need it for evaluation purposes. We need it for human hiring decision experience kind of purposes. So thinking about how reliant we are on proprietary governmental data, how do we protect that? How do we ensure the reliability of that? And how do we build the data pipeline in a way that allows those interactions to be as relevant and as accurately as possible?
Are there places outside the federal government, Patrick, that you point people to in the government, or maybe within the government, but different parts that you point folks to say, they're doing something similar to or the same as what you're doing, and you may be able to learn from them?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are tons of people that have shining moments, right? And I think there are definitely a few where I'll point them to. One was actually one of the largest advertising agencies in the world, where they had myriad agencies underneath them, and they wanted to build this network of all marketable adults in North America, for instance, and being able to take that scale or that scope of data and really apply complex questions to it. Like, I think that's where it starts to get interesting, and the same thing on the governmental side, right? Where you've got some very interesting approaches, sometimes because of resource constraints, right? And I think that the environment that people are working in often create these very unique, the champagne moments that you get, right? And so I think it's really important to sort of look across the breadth, look on your neighbor's test paper, right? To see what can I steal from around me. And the more that we sort of beg, borrow, and steal from each other, I think the more we're going to sort of aggregate those shining moments.
The timing of this program is interesting based on one thing that you just said. People are all across the federal government are thinking about resources right now. What drives what you just described, that sometimes limited resources makes people think harder, think more innovatively or whatever? How do you realize the maximum potential of that situation, Patrick?
Yeah, I mean, I think you've just highlighted a very large sort of pressure cooker that is creating a lot of impetus to find efficiencies, right? However you feel about the sort of reduction in force in the federal government, it's forcing those agencies that are now being asked to produce the same amount of results with fewer resources to get a lot smarter about how they spend those resources and where the answers come from. And so AI is actually well timed for this, because that's one of the things that it does really well, is it can take informed, educated people that understand the technology and multiply their impact.
Mike talked in the first part of this program, Taka, about the agencies that decide AI is a cool thing to do or useful tool, and they pursue AI. I know from conversations you and I have had, both in OPM and at GAO, you thought about it differently and looked for use cases, as I mentioned at the beginning of the program. How did you analyze issues that needed help at OPM and decide either we should apply an AI solution here, or this isn't an AI thing and we should go in a different direction?
Yeah, one of my personal pet peeves is we often talk about AI like that movie Lord of the Rings. There's a one flavors of AI that governs them all. But in reality, the way I think about it, there's 5 common archetypes. You have your chat GPTs of the world, while great, but it's a very difficult use case for governmental agency to deal with, especially with proprietary, non-public information. And then you have these almost like a productivity augmentation like Microsoft Office, Excel, PowerPoint, things like that. These 2 categories are general purpose AI. They don't really understand the context of your organization. They will transcribe your meetings for you. They will even sort of do your Excel functions for you. But fundamentally, they don't know the difference between OPM and GAO. The vast majority of our attention were focused on these bespoke, in-house developed solutions to serve a very specific mission objective. And then the fourth one are these AI products that we end up buying, whether it's Adobe, whether it's Canva, whether it's some other sort of tool to specifically focus on those functions. But the last category is actually the one that kept me up at night, is all these surprise AI that show up. We didn't ask for them, but when I turn on the laptop, suddenly shining flashlight to say, try this AI feature. And of course, then we have to now spin up retrospectively all of the risk management, contractual procurement risk, related conversation. So when you start unpacking AI into those different archetypes, I find we're having much more nuanced discussions around risk, value, and costs.
Patrick, we just have a minute or so left, but your eyes lit up when he talked about risk.
Absolutely. Well, it's not necessarily risk, but I really wanted to underscore sort of the understanding that there's different kinds of AI, and people that try to lump it all into one package is tough, because when you look at it, the sort of generalized AI that people that know from ChatGPT, when they take that thing that is the appearance of intelligence and they stuff it into a very, very specific use case, you've taken something that is, quote unquote smart, and you've made it dumb. Right? And so I think you really need to understand the tool that you're working with. Don't try to hammer a nail with a wrench.
I'm really good at that. If you ask my wife, she will testify to my ability to do exactly that. Patrick, Taka, thanks very much for joining me. You can read more about data readiness at fedgovtoday.com. Up next, the White House's AI action plan sets the stage for innovation. You'll learn how when intelligent government continues in a moment.
Know what you gotta do. Nobody gonna stop you. Yeah, it's time to make a move. Yeah, we're gonna do what we do. Watch us, watch us. Watch us now. Watch us, watch us. Gonna show you how. Tell me, are you ready? Ready, ready right now. Tell me, are you ready? Ready, ready right now. Ready, ready right now. Oh, 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 oh. Just watch us. Oh, 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 oh. Gonna show you how. Tell me, are you ready? Ready, ready right now. Tell me, are you ready? Ready, ready right now.
Welcome back. Agencies say they're adding emerging technologies like AI every day to improve efficiency and service delivery. Some agencies say they're finding, though, that those emerging technologies can also introduce new challenges. Here to take a look at AI strategies, Daryl Roberts, the Chief Information Officer at the Defense Logistics Agency, and Jonathan Album, Federal Chief Technology Officer at ServiceNow and former CIO at USDA. Gentlemen, welcome. Thanks for joining me. Daryl, you at DLA have been on the AI journey for a long time before the AI executive order. How has that impacted the direction that you've taken, the way that you're looking at AI at DLA, if at all?
So I think it's allowed us to accelerate what we're doing from an AI implementation perspective, the guidance in terms of using innovation, speed, and accounting for risk and compliance. We had those factors before, but for us, the need to implement AI from an interoperability perspective, because we are a combat support agency for logistics. So working with the services, the COCOMs in terms of logistics, supply chain management, that allowed us to get better governance and interoperability from a governance perspective. And so that led us to form a analytics AI center of excellence, so we could coalesce all of our energies and focus on what I would consider strategic outcomes. We didn't focus on ChatGPT and things of that nature first, but really because of the investment, how do we get outcomes that increase readiness, enable readiness, and effectiveness of our supply chain operations? How do we better predict our cash position in order to support the services? And how do we accelerate our procurement? We already had automation. We did about 10,000 contracts per day. But how do we use that to accelerate what we do and keep things in an automated fashion for our agency?
When you stood up the AI Center of Excellence, how did you determine what you wanted the outcome of that Center of Excellence? What was the deliverable that you and your colleagues decided that would
So the first thing was data acumen, digital acumen, having a digital first mentality. That wasn't something that is pervasive across the agency. We had our, what I would call our centers of excellence, pockets of excellence. So we wanted to level set from a data acumen perspective. Why are we doing AI? Why are we investing in analytics and technology at Echelon? So the worker within the warehouse, our procurement analysts, our business analysts understood why we were making that investment. And then we also wanted to make sure they understood this wasn't a technology implementation for us. This was really a workforce multiplier in terms of how do we use AI to increase the effectiveness of our workforce moving forward. So we refer to them as our digital assistants, virtual assistants, employees when we look at AI, and train the leadership. So you can't request AI throughout your workforce if you don't understand it yourself. So we started with the top-down approach with AI to say, how do we get our acumen at a certain level so it can really start working on those really hard problems that have very effective strategic outcomes.
Jonathan, welcome. You and I have spoken about AI a number of times over the years. A lot of the concepts that we've talked about on this program already and that Daryl just mentioned are things that you and I have discussed in the past. What are the big building blocks that you see for successful organizations that are getting into this space?
So I think Daryl made a great point that they started with mission outcomes in mind. So it's very tempting in this moment to buy an AI product and be able to say, hey, we have AI. But if it's not positioned in a way that people are going to notice, driving a tangible outcome and making a difference in the way they do their jobs, people are going to wonder, well, what's the real mission value? It's nice and it's great that we can say we have it, but how does it help me do my job? So the mission outcome, and the second thing Daryl said that I completely agree with is you have to think about it as a workforce multiplier. And whether it is an AI agent or it's an assist that is given to an employee as they're trying to perform a function, a recommendation perhaps, you know, those are the things that make us more productive. And, you know, it's not a secret that we have less resources today than we did in the past. We have fewer people, our budgets are smaller. So how do we take advantage of these technologies to overcome that and create the more efficient government that we've been talking about for, you know, for many years? And, you know, what Daryl's doing, what other agencies are doing are definitely demonstrating that it's possible. I think the challenge that we're going to have as a federal IT community is to continue the momentum. And as we encounter challenges, because there's always challenges with these technologies, let's, as a community, figure out ways to overcome these and continue to push forward, because all it takes is one bad headline, one story, and, you know, we stop in our tracks. But this is too big and too important for that to happen. So we just have to be prepared for the ways that we work together to overcome those challenges and really demonstrate the value and show that productivity increase.
I went back and listened to one of the first podcast interviews that you and I did about AI when agencies first started to wrestle with this, I want to say 2 or 2.5 years ago. And I asked you there, what questions should people in agencies be asking that you're not sure they're asking? And you said, what's the point? And I said, what do you mean by that? And you said, what's the mission delivery outcome? So that's still a very prescient way of looking at this.
And it's always been, and it always will be for anybody who works in government, from IT to procurement, HR, you're in the mission, what have you. If your work doesn't align with an outcome, whether you're helping an internal customer or a member of the public, the question that you're going to get, certainly as a leader, is, well, why are you doing this work if it doesn't drive mission effectiveness, if it doesn't support the delivery of a benefit, so on and so forth. So we're trained that way as leaders in government.
And that leadership acumen that you described a moment ago then, based on what Jonathan just said, sounds like maybe the smartest of all the smart things that you did, because that gets then that leader going, oh, well, this technology could help us do X. I imagine you had a number of those instances.
Oh, absolutely. It's changing the way we recruit for our workforce. How do we upskill and train our workforce? That's at the forefront of what we're doing, because this is one of the technology investments where, from a government perspective, we don't want to outsource the use of this. We want to work with software technology companies, cloud companies to use the native tools and really learn how to do this ourselves. So when you look at one of the Secretary of War's priorities, it was, how do you bring some of that work back into government so it's more sustainable? We don't outsource warfighting. We shouldn't outsource logistics. And so that's a focus for us, is how are we using these technologies to actually upskill and train our workforce so we maintain some of these models on our own.
You're in an interesting spot at DLA to do this work too, I think, Daryl, because you're directly supporting warfighters, and yet you also have a lot of what I think a lot of organizations would call back office type functions as well. Does the way that you approach AI for each side of that differ, or because the ultimate mission to support the warfighter is the same, you kind of take the same approach to kind of both sides of the house, I guess?
So I think we take a collective approach. What it's allowed us to do is really start with the problem we're solving for. To Jonathan's point, you don't want to do AI for the sake of doing AI. What's the point? And for DLA, we get requisitions in, requests in, so there's customer service aspects. There's the acquisition procurement part of that. How do you pay for it? How do you actually buy the product, work with the vendor, that interoperability, and then distribution of those products. And what's unique to us, we actually dispose of products as well. So as the services are finished with the life cycle of weapon system and other things, we're responsible for the disposal of that. And so we've looked at it holistically end to end to say, what problems do we need to solve for strategically? And how does that interoperability and collaboration need to occur between a lot of those back office functions along with our blue collar workforce?
And I asked that question, Jonathan, because I imagine there are a lot of organizations out there that think, well, this part of the organization does this. You had this at USDA. This bureau does this bureau does something completely different. So maybe that's going to require a different strategy or different approach or different whatever. And that's not always the case.
No, it might, but it's not always the case. And I think having an open mind about how technology can serve multiple mission areas, you need to have that at the CIO level, and you certainly need leadership inside the bureaus and sub-organizations to have that perspective as well. It's very easy for someone to say, no, I'm different, I need my own. And that thinking has got us into the situation where we have a lot of technical debt and we have a lot of systems that do similar things. So it does require a different perspective at all levels of the organization. I think one way to bring about that kind of change is to recognize that the best ideas don't always come from the CIO. The best use of this AI technology are not things that would come from my office at USDA, perhaps. But we have so many good, smart people across government in the programs that have worked so hard to make these programs effective. They recognize that if they have a technology like AI, if they have AI agents, if they have generative AI technologies, they could be a lot more efficient. They could be a lot more effective in their work. They could cut costs. So we have to listen to them and create environments where their ideas can bubble up to the top quickly and they have a voice in the conversation. I think too often we in the IT community have said, well, it's a technology thing. Let us, lead the way. And I think, if anything, the AI moment is one that is an enterprise moment, and it requires top-down leadership from the very top of the agency through programs, of course, including the CIO and Chief Data Officer, Chief AI Officer, and all of us, but it is a collective leadership moment.
I think your point's spot on, because that's part of our focus. How do we democratize and federate the use of AI outside of the CIO's shop? And so while we have a CDAO who's responsible for oversight, policy, compliance, we really want our warfighters at the edge to have the ability, get the training to actually use the AI more quickly. A lot of these tools, with a little bit of training, right, you can create very simple models, but where our value is where you have that cross collaboration that's required, the complex LLM models. That's where you really want the CIO leading that type of effort.
But Daryl, you were nodding very enthusiastically when he was talking, when Jonathan said the good ideas don't all come from the CIO shop. Where have you found good ideas? Where have you found good input from people across your organization, or does it really come from all over the organization?
It comes from all over the organization. We've created a governance process where we centralize the ideas, and I really start with the problem you're solving for. So a lot of our use cases, they're not just AI use cases. They involve some process reengineering. You have too many steps in the process, so how do you make it more efficient? Automation. How can you automate parts of the process, data collection, things of that nature, which ultimately feeds your AI model. So we get them from, the lowest levels of the workforce, and we get them from senior leaders, but it's really focusing on which ones are going to have high value strategic outcomes. That's what we're focused on now. We've put those in 3 categories. We called it catalysts: auditability, transparency, accountability of our operations and our supply chains. Forecaster, how do we get better demand planning and forecasting for what we need to acquire for the warfighter? And then optimizer, from business operations to the management of our supply chains. How are we going to optimize that using our AI?
Jonathan, I'm struck by the number of people like a Daryl that tell me that this is a business process modernization opportunity as well as an efficiency cost savings opportunity. Are you seeing that too?
100%. And I would add into that, it's an HR moment also, because as we adopt these technologies, there's a lot of change in how people are going to do their jobs. We need to make sure we have a workforce that has the right skill sets, and there are different skill sets. Interacting with a AI tool, a chat tool, requires language skills, not necessarily coding skills, right? So you have to, have employees trained the right way. And as we adopt more agentic AI technologies, and we have these, I think we'll have these hybrid teams of digital workers and human workers, we're really changing what the workforce looks like. And you're going to have digital workers from every technology in your organization has some AI agent capability. And as we incorporate those into a singular approach to solving a business problem, the work of the human worker is going to change, and we really need to help people through that change. It's going to be different, and I think that the HR leadership up and down in that organization really needs to be focused on this problem, and in partnership with the CIO and the Chief Procurement Officer and everybody who's going to bring this technology into an agency. We need to be thinking about the people. It always comes back to the people, right? So we have to put them front and center at this time.
As if there were not enough things for you to collaborate with at DLA with your chief financial officer, your Chico, and the other executives in the suite. Here's another thing, Daryl.
And we're partnered with our HR folks, not just for the training and upskilling of folks, but I think it also allows us to see where we have training gaps with our staff. We look at training AI models like we would train an employee, right? The same upkeep and training you would have to do to make an employee successful, you have the same effort for the AI. And we think that's going to help inform where we have those training gaps for our staff so they can be more effective, and where do we need to upskill and train them based on those gaps.
We're almost out of time for this part of the program, but to wrap up, Daryl, do you have an opportunity to look over the horizon and think about what AI looks like at DLA 2 years from now, 5 years from now, or is the technology changing so rapidly and your use cases for it changing so rapidly that you're just kind of bearing down on what you've got in front of you today?
So I think our approach has been to look at the various types of AI. The use cases will change, but I think our strategy has been, how do we invest in agentic AI, generative AI, your chat GPT type AI, agent orchestration, to solve various problems. So our framework has been, how do we get the tools that give us the agility and flexibility to implement AI for various problem sets, and then focus on the problems that we would implement for each of those cases. And so I think we have a great framework that gives us the flexibility to be innovative and agile, as opposed to committing to one technology and having to adjust later.
Very quick final thought, Jonathan. Where do you tell people like Daryl at agencies, what should I be thinking about long view?
I think that he should be thinking about governance. All these tools that he's bringing in that are going to provide great value, support the mission, they're going to be less successful unless there's an overall program to manage not just the individual models, but the value that they're producing and whether or not they're still contributing successfully to the mission. It sounds like the governance conversation is happening, and I think that's a great sign at your agency. And that's a conversation that we are having continually with CIOs across government right now.
And if I could add one thing, the other part of that governance is staying close to the commercial partners and the vendors that are deploying technology. So as you make that investment, you understand their roadmap, and you're able to inform that roadmap, but also be able to utilize it once new technology is
great
at
point.
the forefront.
Jonathan, Daryl, it's great to have both of you here. Thanks for joining me. Great to see you again.
Thank
You can read more about lessons learned from AI deployments at fedgovtoday.com. Up next, where the buck stops for AI governance and risk management. Intelligent Government continues in just a moment.
Behold, AI. They say it will change our world. How about we start by changing work? On the ServiceNow platform, AI transforms your business with elevated experiences so employees work smarter, developers work faster, and customers are happier. Because everything works better when people work better. Let's put AI to work for people. The world works with ServiceNow.
Welcome back. So far in this show, you've learned how to take control of your data, harness automation, and optimize mission performance with strategic AI investments. Leaders in government and industry, and some folks on this program, say risk management is the final piece of that puzzle. To bring you that piece, Martin Stanley, AI and Risk Management Framework Lead at the National Institute of Standards and Technology, and Melissa McGriff, Vice President of Federal at ServiceNow. Welcome to both of you. Thanks for joining us. Martin, I start with you. We've talked about governance on this a lot. How does risk management connect to all of the things that we've talked about so far in this show?
So risk management is really where the rubber meets the road in organizations as they're adopting AI. They realize that they're doing some things that are different, and there's some different risks that they might have to account for that they wouldn't ordinarily account for in their risk management process. NIST has the Artificial Intelligence Risk Management Framework. It's been out for about 3 years now, and it has a process to go through for organizations to introduce AI risk management into their enterprise risk management program. And so one of the foundational functions is cross-cutting function, govern, which is a way to introduce governance into that environment. But you are not doing AI risk management in isolation, within your organization. And the key point, I think, about AI risk management that oftentimes gets conflated with some of the more compliance-oriented risk functions is that you're looking to take on the right amount of risk in your organization in order to achieve these benefits, as opposed to completely eliminate all kinds of risk associated with, technology adoption and innovation, which actually stymies innovation.
Mm-hmm. Are there best practices to assess risk in an AI environment, or is it the same process that one uses to assess risk in other parts of operation?
So I think one of the biggest differences with AI, as opposed to some of the other, technology risk management, I've done cyber for a long time, is that it's very contextual. So an AI risk associated with a particular AI capability in a particular domain may have entirely different risks than in another domain. So if you have a visual recognition or a computer vision system, and it's doing something like automated driving, or it's trying to determine what's going on in the environment around your car, that's much different than doing a medical imagery analysis or something else like that. So those kinds of risks are going to vary based on how you're using the technology, and as a result, when we typically transfer a technology from one use to the next, we don't normally think about that, but that's something within governance we now have to think about.
The governance risk management connection, Melissa, strikes me from not just what Martin said, but from what we've talked about on this program as maybe the most important issue in all of this. Is that a fair read on my part, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is. Bringing those two together is really going to be key to, having successful AI implementations. We talked a lot about, the outcomes, right? And how it's not just about, doing AI for the sake of AI. It's really about the outcomes and what we're going to get out of it. What's the efficiency that's going to be gained? How is the agency really going to benefit?
What have you seen organizations do, the ones that have been successful, to connect those two pieces, to connect the governance and the risk management, to really make progress?
I think it's all about, the reason that you're doing the governance is to manage the risk, right? And so, bringing that into, the agency and making sure that you manage that risk is really where, agencies have been successful.
I want to back up for a minute, Martin, based on something that you said a moment ago. When you devised the risk management framework specifically for artificial intelligence, did you start with a clean sheet, or did you start with other risk management techniques in other types of information technology or other types of operations?
So that's a great question. We leveraged as much as we could, and of course I wasn't one of the original authors of the IRMF, but we leveraged as much existing risk management language and approaches and techniques. And that's why it's part of your enterprise risk management program, because you may already be doing particular risk management activities in your cyber or other, privacy, other areas. And so you don't want to duplicate that in AI. You may be able to leverage that. And so having people from these other domains, whether they're privacy or cybersecurity or safety or whoever it happens to be, that are already in that mature enterprise risk management function, advising the AI team as they're coming in, hey, we have these artifacts that you need. That's the kind of communication, that you want to have, in order to foster, really good enterprise capability.
The federal government has not been in the risk management business for as long as some sectors in the private sector, financial services and so on, have been at this game for a long time. Has that had any impact on the way that the federal government looks at or implements the framework that you have, that you put out?
Yeah, so again, another really, really great question. I talked earlier about taking on the right amount of risk. I think we all know that federal agencies and in general and IT in particular are generally kind of risk averse, based on compliance, and that translates, I think, in other disciplines as well, other outside government. However, with AI, you can't avoid the risks. You have to manage risks, number one, and the benefits are so compelling that you have to go looking to achieve those. So we've looked at some of the more mature areas. The AI risk management framework actually shares a lot of DNA with the Federal Reserve Model Regulation SR 11-7, which is for the use of algorithmic models in financial services, banks, things of that nature. So we've tried as much as we could to leverage that kind of those techniques, but also use the same language, in a very simple language. We talk about risks, we talk about likelihoods, and we talk about impacts, both positive and negative, so that you can build this trade space where you are taking on the right amount of risk to achieve a benefit.
I think that's too where we talk about the public-private partnerships, right? Where, bringing the innovation from, private sector into, public sector to help solve their problems, right? That partnership is really key as well.
What are some of the private sector groups that are doing risk management around AI in the same way that a federal agency might? Are there certain sectors that are kind of parallel to what federal organizations are doing, Melissa?
Yeah, I think definitely. I mean, we've had conversations, where we're already, sharing that information, right? This is the way we're doing it. This is, how we're using this, and sharing that information back and forth. And that's where those, public-private partnerships really, I think benefit us both.
Well, you probably show up with a lot of the things that we have to be in, policies that we have to be in compliance with, and are able to make sure that we understand as well how your capabilities can achieve those.
Yeah, absolutely.
What are the risk assessment techniques that you've seen people have success with in the public sector, Melissa, as far as determining this is a risk, this is one we can tolerate, this is one we can tolerate less?
Yeah, we talk about that. We talked about that some with our AI control tower too. I think the first part of that is really understanding, what the risks are that are out there and having a single pane of glass to do that, so you can see the risks that are out there. You can see kind of all of your AI tools, all of the use cases that you're using for, and then like we talked about before, it's really the outcomes, right? And how are we measuring those outcomes? And that's where it's really key that we're measuring that. And it's like, are you getting what you expected out of all these different AI tools and all these different AI use cases, so that we don't have to look back and say, we spent all this money, we did all this, and we didn't get the value. And the same thing applies from a risk perspective. Are we willing, is there enough value in this that the risk is worth it? And, of course, being in regulatory compliance and all of those things as well, there's some that, are non-starters, but
Well, Melissa, you brought up, I think, two really important points. One is, of course, the outcomes are very, very critical here. And it's not the outputs that we're talking about. We're talking about the outcomes. And so that means, what do you actually do, or what does someone in your organization do with the outputs that they get from the AI?
Yeah.
That's the outcome. Or what do some of your stakeholders potentially do with these outputs? And the other important point that you brought up, something that is near and dear to my heart as a member of NIST, where we are, our main purpose for being is metrology, the science of measurement, is how do we measure these outputs? We use traditionally in IT sort of these fixed measures to determine, is this an actual correct or accurate output? But AI systems are often are non-deterministic, which means the outputs can vary, and they can vary over time, which are things that really require this vigilance and what we call a risk-aware culture, so that you can understand how well the systems are performing in your mission areas and affecting those outcomes.
We come back to culture, as we do very often on these programs. What does a culture look like that's built up in
a risk-aware culture?
Yeah.
So a risk-aware culture, and I thought Taka did a really nice job. He did it on his own with, I call it the two pizza room or something like that. That's fantastic. So it means you have the right people across the organization that can speak to not only the mission objective that you have, but what are the outputs that are happening, and what are those outputs, and how are they going to be used by the people that are going to ultimately create these outcomes. And you aren't going to get that picture the way that we normally do in a traditional IT organization, where we have the CIO and the CISO talking about doing a authorization based on some automated tests that we did, right?
This almost makes it, Melissa, to me, more challenging for whoever's responsible for the governance piece, because you don't have, okay, we gave this service to 15,000 people. That's really measurable. This strikes me as a little bit more amorphous, and I wonder what that means about the way that you recommend that people think about how we know we're on the right track, how we know we're doing what we want to accomplish with artificial intelligence, and fulfilling that ultimate goal of what's the mission that we're trying to deliver on.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that is the visibility of those outcomes, and being able to measure them. I'm on repeat a little bit, but it's really that important that we're doing that. And, just back to the culture piece as well, I think at all levels of the organization, there's a piece of that, right? It's the executive level that's, setting the strategy, the policies, getting all that in place. And then it's the team that's doing the implementation. And, are they implementing, monitoring, controlling? You've got legal involved, you have the end users, are they really seeing the value that we're saying that they're seeing? So, that has to be a collaborative effort and throughout the whole organization.
And they can also tell you how they're using the AI, which may not be the way you thought they would.
Yeah.
And then that reinforces this continuous and
back to what Daryl was saying, they're at all levels of the organization, people are bringing in use cases that are bringing efficiency to, the entire organization. So it gives everybody an opportunity to do that, right? And then benefit from it.
And that connects actually to where I wanted to go next, which is, what does all of that, what does the evolution of the technology, what does the input from users and new applications that are unanticipated when organizations are building strategies and so on, how does that inform the way that people need to continue to think about their own risk management frameworks as all of those factors evolve over time?
Well, I think the biggest challenge, at least that we're seeing, is because there's this, mass adoption of artificial intelligence across organizations, not to have too heavy hand from a governance perspective, don't have, a whole ton of paperwork to fill out in a 6-month approval process. So looking at those use cases that are high impact, and the federal government's actually done a nice job of this with OMBM 2521, where there's an identification of what are the high impact uses of AI that require a lot further and more diligence around their implementation and the potential risks. But then other things outside that you might want to handle a little bit differently, and certainly from an innovation perspective, we do that at NIST. We have laboratories where people are using AI for all kinds of lab experiments and things like that, and there's a pretty low bar in order to do that. But if we're using it for a high impact use, then of course we want to take a close look at what the potential impacts of that might be.
Melissa, we have about a minute left. What do you tell agencies who are thinking, I know that we're going to be using these applications more and more. I know that we're going to be making progress in getting our data, getting all the things we've talked about on this program. What do you, when they come to you and say, what's the missing link? What could I be missing? What is usually your answer to that?
I would say, it really is the governance. No one gets excited about governance. If I say I'm going to talk about AI governance, they're like, wow, okay, it's going to be super exciting.
Yeah, right.
But that is everything that we've talked about has really come back to this. And, without it, I think we've seen, several projects that didn't have the right governance in place, and, without, the results aren't there. And without having those guardrails, while making it easier for people to use it, you're just not as successful. So.
Melissa, Martin, it's great to have both of you on the program. Thanks very much for joining me. I really appreciate it. You can read more about all the topics that we talked about today at fedgovtoday.com. Thanks very much for watching Intelligent Government, Smart Strategies to Accelerate AI Innovation, presented by ServiceNow. If you missed any part of this show, you can watch it on demand anytime at fedgovtoday.com or the FedGov Today YouTube channel. I'm Francis Rose. Thanks again for watching.
What you gotta do, nobody gonna stop you. Yeah, it's time to make a move. Yeah, we're gonna do what we do. Watch us, watch us, watch us now. Watch us, gonna show you how.